Welcome back, everyone, and welcome also to everyone watching on the live web stream. I'm Chris Hogg, and I'm joined beside me by a panel of four. We've got Adam Saron here, the CEO and founder of Clara. We've got Luke Webster, who's the co-founder and the CEO of the Pension SuperFund. We've got David Fairs, whose title I'm going to read, which is a bit longer. Executive Director for Regulatory Policy Analysis and Advice at the Pensions Regulator. And we've also got Sue Applegarth, the CEO of the SAUL Trustee. So we're going to talk about DB change, and we're going to talk about actually consolidation, which is a discussion that the PLSA has been very heavily involved in over the last couple of years. And we're going to focus in to some extent on the commercial consolidators that we're seeing now starting to appear. And I also need to encourage you, for those of you that tweet, if you'd like to do so, then the hashtag is PLSA Annual, so please do that. I'm going to start with Adam and Luke, and actually Adam, we'll start with you. I think it'd be good just if, in introduction, you could give us a little bit about you and your organisation.
With pleasure. Well, I'd like to begin by thanking both the PLSA and Chris Hogg for inviting me to participate in this year's conference on behalf of Clara. My name is Adam Saron. I'm the Chief Executive and founder of Clara. It's worth reminding ourselves that consolidation is not something new. It already exists in many forms. And for example, the PPF is definitely a consolidator, and although their purpose is purely social, it's true to say that they are the fund with the superpowers. The insurers too, they're consolidators of pension liabilities, and I don't think it's unfair to say that they're commercial consolidators. Luke and I, however, represent two new consolidators. And what do we mean by that? Well, we're looking to bring together the assets and liabilities of multiple closed defined benefit pension schemes to manage them together, and crucially in that process, to separate those transferring schemes from their current sponsor, to allow the sponsor to fulfill its promise to members. In listening to our debate today, I would encourage you to focus both on the agreement and the differences. I think there is broad agreement that a consolidation can create and can release value, but there are real differences in how and when that value is shared between members, between sponsors, and indeed between capital providers. But difference is valuable and important. It's not just about competition between us, but rather it's more about choice. It's about widening the choice that is available to schemes and to trustees, and indeed their sponsors as well. Consolidation will not be the solution for every scheme, but we believe that Clara is a real option for a wide cross-section. So what is it that makes Clara different? Well, Clara is the member-first solution. So that answers the question of how we share value. It's member-first. And this is not just mere words for us. It represents three crucial features. The first is that Clara is a bridge to buyout. We believe that an insured outcome is the gold standard for members. Therefore, our objective is to deliver a safer pension promise today and a lower risk, quicker path to an insured future for our members. Second is that our capital is first in and last out. This is about when we share value. Clara does not allow a return of capital until every member has had their full benefits secured in the insured market. In other words, our capital providers travel the full journey with members, and our solution actually becomes safer and more secure for members as time passes. And the third point, and not to forget, is that member experience and outcomes are at the core of everything we do. This means, quite simply, high-quality administration and best-in-class governance, because governance drives member outcomes. And I'd like to conclude by actually explaining why I'm here. The Clara team has been working for nearly 2 years to get to this point. We believe passionately that Clara's purpose-built solution will make a clear difference to both members and sponsors. Clara will consolidate, protect, and then transfer our members to a fully insured pension promise. and the transferring sponsors will have clarity that they have fulfilled their promise to members. I look forward to taking your questions as the discussion progresses.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Luke?
Thanks, Chris. Reiterate thanks for being here. The pension superfund, again, falls into the bracket of what's starting to be referred to as commercial consolidators, but I'd reiterate Adam's comments that with the exception of our colleagues at the PPF, most consolidation is done for a commercial purpose of some form, explicitly in the case of insurers or in the case of corporate mergers, which are using exactly the same legal pathways as we will be using for our solutions. It's usually to generate savings and other dividends of consolidation. So what we set out to do is to create an enduring occupational pension fund. And on day one, for the schemes transferring into that, achieve an outcome where new capital is injected into the pension system. And really that is at the heart of what we're doing here. We're offering trustees the opportunity to swap effectively the monoline credit risk of relying on a single employer to fill the gap with a defined amount of security, which will then be invested in a diversified portfolio. And that is really the decision that rests at the heart of those schemes contemplating a transfer in. Much like Adam's solution, this is not perhaps applicable to every scheme, but we believe there's a very large set of schemes out there who could benefit from this approach. We have a slightly different economic model. As I said, our intention is to create an occupational pension scheme. There may well be insurance transactions as part of our general risk management of our scheme, but we are not explicitly a pathway to buyout. We would describe ourselves very much as member first. So in our model, once thresholds of capital adequacy are reached, the first people to benefit are the scheme members through one-off benefit increases. We structure those in a way such as to be one-off so that we're not adding to the ultimate DB liability, but it's very important to us that we achieve total alignment between scheme members and investors, and that sharing of upside is something that has always been part of our design. Once a higher level of capital adequacy has been reached, then it is possible for capital to be returned to the original providers of capital, so those providers of new money. So the circumstances where we think this really applies is schemes where buyout is a long way away, and where that attraction of getting cash now and the ability to reach a situation of very considerable surplus and therefore be able to de-risk and achieve greater certainty about the future is an option. So schemes where there is clear water between our entry price and buyout would be where we think the natural sweet spot would lie. We would always expect that where trustees have the option of insurance certainty, that they would take that. But there are a very large number of schemes who can't afford that and who should not be denied, in our view, the very material benefits of consolidation. So that's I guess, an overview of how our proposition is structured. In terms of why I'm here, I have some experience of pensions consolidation in the local government sector, which has proceeded at a quite extraordinary pace, and it contains many success stories. But I suppose for me, the sort of frustration of that process was that it really only addressed one half of the balance sheet. And for me, one of the reasons why pensions is so interesting is that it's more than an asset management exercise. It's very much understanding the liabilities as much as the assets. And to my mind, that process actually gets easier with scale. So providing that one isn't sectionalized, adding more members to a scheme with slightly different profiles diversifies idiosyncratic risks, and it makes the overall behavior of the portfolio slightly more predictable, and that allows you to construct a matching portfolio with greater ease. And for us, that's a real source of value here, as well as the well-rehearsed advantages of consolidation, which apply to every model, including master trusts and others. Really, by pooling resources for a given quantum of resource per member, you can end up with a much better resource trustee body in particular, and that allows you to achieve levels of resilience that are very hard for smaller schemes. So we don't, for a moment, claim that we can do a better job than every small or smaller scheme out there, because there are very many case studies of absolutely excellently run small schemes. But I would argue that the key person risk in those situations is often very large. And by pooling our resources in this way, we can set up something that is stable and enduring, and also good value, in our view, for UK PLC. So that value, the ability to deliver a situation which gives a very, very high probability of benefits being paid in full, not quite as high as insurance, so there is some additional risk there, but in the case of our members, it's compensated by the upside if things go well, which I reiterate they get far before investors do. I think that'll do for me for now.
Absolutely. So, David, just to finish off the sort of initial context, where is the regulator on this, and what can we expect to see?
Well, we heard earlier that the Minister is a great enthusiast because of the benefits of scale and the investment opportunities. And we likewise are very supportive of DB consolidators. But we have to recognise that there are some new challenges and new risks that go alongside those. And the Minister also talked about a consultation paper, and I think that will set out some of the benefits of consolidation, but also some of the challenges. And as he said, he's hoping for a pensions bill, but realistically it's going to be 2 years before that bill comes into effect. So if the consultation paper creates the need for legislation, it's going to be 2 years before that's impacted. And we're very conscious that the regulator, that these two gentlemen to my right are open for business under the current regime, and therefore that presents us some challenges because we're looking at them under the present regime. We have had very strong dialogue with both, very regular contact, to try and understand the business models, the investment, the profit extraction mechanisms. But we have made it very clear that when they do their first transaction, we would expect them to come for voluntary clearance. And really what we're looking for is member detriment. Are members actually going to be no worse off than they were previously? And I think there's a challenge for trustees, and we'll look at the decision process for trustees, because clearly they could carry on as they are. They could move to a DB master trust, they could move to a commercial consolidator, or they could buy out. So the rationale of why they reached that decision is interesting, and that's what Sue, I think, is going to focus on. Clearly, I think the Minister has talked about a consultation document. It will be really helpful for us, for our, my two friends to my right, but also trustees, to understand what that consolidation document will say. But it's probably important to say that that's not happening in isolation. The regulator is also looking at the funding code. We're starting with our expert group next week. We're going out for consultation in the spring, and a draft code in the autumn of next year. And it's probably important to say we're not looking to take away completely the flexibilities under the funding code, but we will be very clear on what we mean by prudent and appropriate. That will clearly apply to all DB schemes, and specifically, these consolidation vehicles are defined benefit schemes, and that will take special consideration in there. Probably the last thing I would say, Leslie spoke earlier that we're in the middle of the master trust authorisation, where we've got principles around fit and proper processes, financial sustainability, and clearly we'll learn lessons through going through that process, which may also be appropriate for DB consolidation vehicles.
Yeah, okay. And for the benefit of the audience, I'm sure David's probably aware of this time, but I managed to pin down the Minister at lunchtime and asked him when that consultation would come out, and his first response was soon, which wasn't that helpful. But then he said that he'd be surprised if it wasn't out by Christmas, was his comment. So So I suspect we might come back to some of that. Sue, and probably worth pointing out the obvious that, you know, in a formative market and what's, I think, rightly been described as a nascent market at the moment, Clara and Pension SuperFund don't represent that whole market, and I think, you know, believe there's already other people thinking about this a lot. But in the context of what you've heard here, where does a trustee start with this?
Okay, so I think I'm going to narrow down a little bit more and say, okay, I'm a trustee of a really well-run pension scheme, and my employer has approached me as a trustee to say, actually, they've been talking to these guys and they're very interested in getting the pension scheme off their balance sheet, and they're happy to pay a premium to do that. So the question to me is, would I actually be willing to investigate that as an option? And I think the answer to that would be yes, I would. But how would I go about doing that? I'd have hundreds of questions, but I think probably they boil down under three main headings. And I think the first of those headings is, could this actually be a better option for my members? Could it be a more secure option for my members compared to maintaining the status quo? The second area, I think, would be, what are the risks of going down this particular route, and how easy will it be to mitigate those risks, and again, compared to maintaining the status quo. And then finally, I'd be looking to ask a load of questions about, actually, is this the right time to go down this particular option, or should I wait a bit? You know, what's the risk of me being an early adopter? So I think if just a couple of thoughts on each of those three areas, and I think that the first about, could this be a better option for my members, I think that's actually quite a hard one, because what you're trying to do here, there's a lot of this that links back to the employer covenant, obviously, and then the covenant of the capital provider that's going to take its place. But what I'm trying to do here is assess whether I'd be better having a significant chunk of money from the employer up front, and then no opportunity to go back to that employer at a later date. So for me, the risk with putting my money with you guys would be, okay, so how good is your covenant then? Because I'm actually giving up a covenant already with my employer. So I'd be asking lots of questions about your capital providers and all of that sort of thing. I think the second thing I'd be looking at in terms of, is this a better option? To me, the risks are still the same if my money's with you, or I'm relying on the covenant. So I've got investment risk that I need to address, and I've got funding risk I need to address. So, you know, how are you dealing with that compared to how I deal with that? And then the third area there is, the money's obviously really, really important in terms of member security, but so is the member experience. So, you know, how am I going to get comfortable that, you know, we deliver a fab service to our members? How can I be sure that you're going to do that? And I'm really conscious of the fact that I'm going to be forcing my members to transfer to your option. So emotionally, you know, that's quite a difficult thing. How will you engage with my members to make them feel comfortable with that? So in terms of, is this a better option, it's funding, but it's also risk, and it's also member service and experience. So that would be my first thing. My second area is about the risk of going down this particular route. And I think in terms of that risk, the regulatory environment would be really important to me. So actually just understanding as a trustee, is it safe for me to take this option? How do I make sure it's as safe as it can be? You know, am I going to see new regulation coming out in the future? Am I going to jump too soon? I think would be one of the questions I would have. And also, if it does all go horribly wrong, how are my members going to be protected? Will they still have the right to, will they be put into the PPF, or is there some other option that's going to be made available instead? And then I think the third area for me would be this timing option. Even if I was willing to think, well, okay, I'll go for early clearance or I'll go for individual clearance, do I want to be the first one to jump? So what's that early adopter risk for me? Yeah. So I think I'd be looking at my advisors quite closely as well for a bit of help and support in, coming out and talking about all of those things. Yeah. That would be really important to me. But my view would be, even if I decided to maintain the status quo, that would be worth doing because I've got an offer of money from my employer. Coming out and talking to people, even if we don't go down that route, will generate a load of perhaps new ideas and different thinking, and I might still be able to get some of that money, even if going down your route isn't the right route for me. Yeah. So I think lots of questions would be the thing for me. So
Luke and Adam, I'm not going to say can you answer those because we could be here for quite a while, but I guess what would you say to trustees who were in a position where they were looking at this and feeling curious about it? What would your sort of comments to them be? Luke, do you want to?
Sure, yeah, I think let's talk would be the response to that, because I think as we both said, this wouldn't necessarily be the best option for every scheme, but the nuance can be quite fine, and it's well worth having a detailed discussion to understand that. I think in terms of that fundamental covenant question, it really depends on some decisions which will ultimately be subjective, but that's precisely why we have trustees to take nuanced decisions. If we could do this by paint by numbers, then it will be much easier. But the reality is that each scheme is different. Circumstances are highly specific, and it depends very much on your view of what your employer's future looks like. Because yes, as you articulated in one of your questions, Sue, if the employer is prepared to put that money in, that's an indication that they've got that money. So that's kind of zero sum on day one for your covenant. But the fact is that you do get it, and then you get additional new money from external capital providers. And the combination of those two things mean that money is effectively in the scheme from day one, and that allows you to de-risk. So even though we wouldn't claim to be able to necessarily do ALM better than anybody else would, we're starting from a much easier beginning point. And the thing is that under this sort of model, then things can of course go wrong. There's still investment risk in the portfolio, but we're achieving scale rapidly, and we'll have a very well diversified and substantially de-risked approach. So the volatility will be very low, and that means that if a problem is coming, you will at least see it coming. It'll be year on year of sustained poor outcomes, which will, that's obviously a bad place to be, but it does mean that you've got some time to address and strategize. Whereas we've seen recently with some very high profile failures of corporates, the corporate fortunes can turn on a sixpence, and it's whether you value that certainty of a diversified approach versus the promise of one single entity.
Adam?
I would say the following. I think the first and almost only thing you need to think about is the member position. Is it better or is it worse? And that really is the whole question. It is the question. Clearly, there are a lot of other detailed questions, and Luke's right. Let's talk about that. But in a sense, for those questions, we would strongly say, look to your advisors. I mean, that is what you pay them for. And it's really been our experience in interacting with sponsors and trustees that situations where advisors are engaged early in the process are looking at the full range of options. It goes much quicker from our perspective as well, because the advisors help to pre-qualify the situation and can say, look, this isn't for you. You can afford buyout and do that today. Or you have bigger problems than you think. And maybe you need to be more aggressive in interacting with your sponsor, any other kind of lifeboat, that may not necessarily be the PPF.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to pick off some online questions, and I'll come to the audience in a second. I've got some interesting things coming through. One person pointing out that the term commercial consolidator may not be the most member-centric term, which is a very good observation. And also asking when you'll complete your first deal, which if you can answer that, I'll be very impressed. So I think it is important that we do bear in mind there are other forms of consolidation. We've touched on that. I wonder, David, if you want to just talk about that a little bit, because obviously there's the Master Trust DB situation, and also, and I think you and the regulator have been quite vocal about encouraging consolidation. How might you expect to measure success of that over time?
Well, I think if somebody is thinking of going into a DB Master Trust, then we have got the Master Trust authorization regime, so that we know that if people are authorized, they've got fit and proper trustees, they've got appropriate process and systems, they've got financial sustainability. So as a regulator, we will have looked at those organizations in some detail before they've gone through that authorization process. But within that, you have still got the link to the sponsoring employer. And what we're talking about in terms of these commercial consolidators is that link is being severed. So that in a sense is quite a step change, that you've got to be very confident that from the member perspective, if things started to go badly in the pension scheme, there would be recourse to an employer, whereas actually there is capital up front, as you've rightly said, but there is then no recourse back to the employer. So there really is quite a step change, and I think that is why I think the government is thinking that there should be a consultation paper. Clearly there are benefits which you've highlighted, but there are issues and risks that we need to look at. We need to make sure that we're comfortable about those and we know about them before we kind of take that step.
And in terms of measuring success, could you imagine a situation where we're looking at the 6,000 DB schemes and thinking about how that might evolve over time?
That's almost an impossible question to answer. We are focused on member outcomes and members receiving the benefits that they expect. And in some cases, you can see that actually if a consolidation delivers on scale, if it delivers on access to investment platforms and improved governance, then it might be more likely that members do receive their full entitlement. But you've got to weigh that against the fact that actually with because we have talked about here relatively strongly funded schemes with strong covenants where the employer can put money into that transaction. So we've got to ask ourselves, actually, would members be better just carrying on in the scheme that they're in, and would they be more likely to get their benefits, or would they indeed be more likely if they go into a consolidation vehicle? So success for me is that all members of all 6,000 schemes get the benefits that they're expecting. But we do know that companies become insolvent, and there could be a case for saying, if there is some money on the table today, that might be better than running the risk over a long period before the fund is fully funded. Yeah. But these are quite complex decisions, I think, to make.
You've just reminded me of, I think, one of the sound bites from the PLSA task force work was around the number of DB members' benefits that were effectively at risk. And I think the stat was there was 42% of DB liabilities had around a 50-50 chance of being paid in full or worse, which is quite an incredible statistic. And actually, we've got a question here online asking if Adam and Luke could just expand a little bit on what are the sort of very real benefits of consolidation, which I think was mentioned briefly earlier. Adam, do you want to? Yeah,
I mean, absolutely. And I think the first thing I'd say is you shouldn't think about all these solutions, all forms of consolidation in an absolute sense. It isn't one or the other. And I think you actually should think about it a bit like a baton race. We're talking about liabilities that are multi-decade long. No one in this room will see out the full job of getting every single member fully paid. So we have to transfer the responsibility on, whether it's to a new board of trustees, whether it's to younger trustees, going into a master trust with ultimately the view to maybe going to a consolidator and then to buy out, or multiple different paths. So the biggest benefit, I think, of a new form of consolidation is another option. That is the first thing. But at the real heart of it, it generates excess value because from an economic perspective, you're better together. The fixed costs rest lightly on the shoulders of many. And the question is, what do you spend it on? I'd say you spend it on members first, you spend it on governance first, because that'll drive outcomes.
Yeah. But again, that was quite a almost controversial part, I think, of the task force analysis was sort of how much economic value might there be in there. Is that something you allow for in your?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely economic value in it. It's hard to measure all of it. I mean, you've got to be honest. Some of it you can put a very firm number on. You can say, we've got a good sense how much we'll net save on administration, how much we'll net save on asset management costs. But the harder number to really quantify is what is the benefit of good data? What is the benefit of good risk management? What is the benefit of good data and good risk management leading to better governance, better decisions, more sophisticated investment strategies? I think it's real, but it's hard to put a number on it. Yeah. But I would say one thing is that we're putting our time and our investors are putting our money behind that.
Sure. Luke, do you want to add to that?
I mean, I'd echo all of those points, and the stronger together point, I think, is a really crucial one, because there are relatively few opportunities in business where you generally get to create win-win situations. This is one of them, both from a governance and financial perspective.
Yeah. And I guess, what about the first few years, and if that goes badly? And presumably, I know, David, you've mentioned that you're not able to talk yet about what's actually going to be on the mind of the regulator, but presumably there will be some stress testing in there. But I mean, you must have thought about that a lot in your business modelling, presumably. Is that fair?
Absolutely, and certainly in our case, we're taking a gradual approach to the cost base, so that we're extremely confident, given the pipeline that we have already, and the analysis of the market that we've conducted, that we should have no problem getting to our operational milestones in terms of scale. But obviously, we have contingencies for should that not happen, and ways to make sure that members will get their full benefits in those circumstances.
Yeah, okay. So I think we'll probably ask the audience for a couple of questions in a minute. Just one last question here. Sue, you've got a background that involves a lot of admin experience. What would you say about the importance of administration in this situation?
Well, admin background, I think that's hugely important, and I think the two challenges are, first of all, as I mentioned, if you go down this route, you've got a group of people who are in a scheme where they know the employer, they know the trustees. They're going to be moved across to a completely different environment. So I think that engagement with members as part of that process, so that they can feel comfortable with what's going on, is really important. I think in terms of assuming that everything works, the members' benefits are safe, it's again, it's about right benefit, right person, right time. And we see so many things happening at the moment where, different options available to member coming up. Will they still be available under the, consolidator model? Different expectations coming from members in terms of how they're supported as they come up through to retirement. So I think that being able to spend money on administration and on engagement will be a hugely important part of the decision-making process, A, as to whether you're going to go down the commercial consolidator route, and B, who you actually select when you've looked at the different options that are available, because there are different models.
Okay, thanks, Sue. So, do we have some questions out there in the audience? Judging by the number we've got in here, I suspect we probably do. And it looks like there's one over here.
Steve Webb, Royal London. how much of a prize would homogenisation, standardisation of DB benefits be? So instead of having zillions of sections shoved together in a consolidator, if you could put them all through a sausage machine and have standardised benefits, would that be a prize? And what would it improve your performance for members by?
Luke?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. I think that's a question that's by no means specific to our propositions. I mean, that applies to many corporate schemes as of today. In our model, whilst our liabilities are not sectionalised, we have preserved we do intend to preserve the benefit structures of each cohort. So there's no sort of demarcation of assets to a group of members, but there will be many different appendices to the trusteedom rules. I think clearly there is a potential benefit to member outcomes from simplification, if only because it substantially reduces the cost of administration, and perhaps more significantly than the cost of business as usual, it reduces the risk of error, and the cost of putting that right can be immense. So I think perhaps more flexibility in that direction would be something that we would welcome, but we would intend to work very closely with our member consultative committees to make sure that is what the members want. I think, yeah, definitely benefits for all.
I think it's, in our model in particular, the benefit would be quite powerful because we're a bridge to buyout, and it's something that the buyout providers will care about a lot. It should make their process a lot easier. That will translate into better pricing, which for us it would absolutely allow us to reach buyout sooner for members, which is exactly what we're trying to do. So it would be incredibly helpful. I don't think it will actually make that much difference on the way in, because you still need to do the work on the existing benefit structures to make sure you understand them before you convert them. There's no getting away from that hard job. Consolidation, like buyout, is a crystallization event. So all the risks that exist in pension schemes today, that we're not creating them, you're just forcing them to the surface, because you have to decide at that point, as Sue said, who your members are, what they should get paid, and when that needs to happen. And you get one chance to get it right.
Okay, Sue or David, do either of you have anything you want to?
No.
I think David wants to touch that one.
Any other questions in the audience? Wow. Looks like all the questions.
If there are no questions, if anyone could think of a better term than commercial consolidator, that'd be great.
There we go.
Hi, Maggie Williams, a freelance journalist. I'm interested to ask the SuperFund providers, how much of an issue, risk, do you see early adopter nerves as being, and how will you try and overcome that?
Adam?
I mean, it's clearly an issue. I think the early adopters get a benefit in price, for sure. I mean, we have to offer something back. I think for both business models, we understand clearly that in the early years, we will lose money. You expect to lose money in any business that's growing. Our capital providers are there to take that loss and not expose the early adopters to it. But the real answer to that question is partnership. And what I mean by that is, certainly for us, we are very excited to be working with partners on the administration side, the asset management side, and actuarial, who are willing, because they believe in consolidation, believe in Clara, to offer those early adopters scale pricing today. So those small schemes will get pricing that they just cannot achieve in administration, in actuarial costs, in asset management costs, that they can't achieve on their own. You have to be able to deliver that up front to give them a reason to cross over.
Luke?
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar situation. For those early adopters, the economic proposition would be very different, and I think it would be extraordinary to classify it as anything other than a massive improvement in the scheme's security and conditions, because there will be this huge investment at the expense of our capital providers providing resources and pricing that just wouldn't be achievable for those schemes individually.
Yeah. There's quite a few questions coming in about the PPF as well. Do you want to just clarify, the position on?
Sure. So, I mean, we are an occupational pension scheme, and we would expect to pay the PPF levy and benefit from that protection. So we're in the process of working with the PPF, responding to their latest consultation, which explicitly mentions consolidators, and we're looking at the new provisions to the levy calculation methodology that would apply to us.
There's a question here about expectations of consultancies and insurers following you into this space. What's your thoughts on?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I think, as I said in my introduction, we expect competition. You need competition. This can't be a single provider market. It can't be an oligopoly. I'm not going to get that right. And if we're correct, and yes, we're commercial ventures, and there is economic value for capital, other capital will follow, and it should. So where that'll come from, I don't really know. Clearly, for advisors, there's the conflict question. It's for them to answer, not for me. And for the insurers, in a sense, I think they're in a difficult position. I don't quite know how the PRA would look on this. Again, it's a question for them, not for us. But more importantly, I think they risk undermining their core business, because if you're a well-known brand name financial services business that offers buyout, and you offer another solution that feels the same to a corporate but feels cheaper, do you really think that branded name provider is going to walk away from anything? So I think that would really cannibalize their existing business. But again, there are multiple different people who could provide the service. We've spoken to a lot of them along the journey. A lot of people seem less interested before. Now there's a real sense from the broader market that this is a real possibility, not for everyone, but for a very significant part.
Yeah.
No, I think there is, if both of you are successful, then presumably other entrants would come into the market. And so from that point of view, you could be very disruptive in the marketplace. And at the regulator, we're looking at the scenarios of what may happen if that comes to pass. So clearly you have the capability of disrupting the traditional marketplace.
Yeah.
I wish to say probably why we're strongly supportive of a very quick publication of the consultation, followed by very quick legislation with very high standards.
So
something we can all agree on.
Yes.
We're sort of coming towards the end of the session. I think it's probably good to give everyone in the panel just a chance to sort of summarise their thoughts. So I guess, well, Sue, let's start with you. So where would a trustee start in this space? What would your suggestion be to them as to what they should be thinking if they find this of interest?
I think the first thing is open mind, and the second is probably a reasonable degree of cynicism as well, because I think what that will do is make sure that as a trustee you don't have, if I call it regret risk, because what you're looking at is saying, okay, I think I've got a pretty well-run scheme at the moment. I've got a good employer-sponsor covenant, or I may not have, but there's something here. Is it worth me investigating so I can be confident whether I stay or whether I move on? That's the right decision for my members. And actually, by looking at those sorts of options, there may be other things as well that come out from the discussions that you have that allow you to take forward in your own scheme and improve that. So I think it's an option that may well be worthwhile considering for some people, and probably when you go back, I don't know, 12 years when people first started mooting the idea of buy-in, buyout, there was probably a healthy degree of cynicism then, but actually, it works for people.
Yeah. David, final thoughts?
We can see some of the benefits from consolidation, but as I said, we also see some of the challenges and risks. And if anybody is out there thinking of setting up a SuperFund, please do come and talk to us. We're interested in dialogue, and certainly come for voluntary clearance before transaction.
Okay. Look.
So I'm looking forward to this becoming a thriving marketplace. I think we've said there's plenty of room for new entrants. We have no monopoly on wisdom. And I think the fact that, for instance, our models are slightly different is a good thing, and we'd hope to see some other variations on that theme coming in, subject to the fitness and propriety in systems and controls, and of course, a sensible level of capital adequacy. But I think the future will evolve in a very interesting way for the DB space. I think there'll be lots more solutions that involve elements of all of the options really available now. It's not a completely binary choice.
Sure. Finally, Adam.
I mean, I would probably start with a lot of the points that have been made, is that ask questions, ask your advisors. Please ask us. We would love to have the conversation. I've been answering questions from regulators, policymakers, sponsors, trustees, journalists, a lot of interested people. And we're always interested to see if someone can come up with a new question we haven't answered yet. So we look forward to it.
Okay. Well, there's a challenge for everyone. So I think we've merely scratched the surface of this topic, but it's certainly good to see the combination of innovation and momentum in the market, and I'm sure we'll all watch this space with interest. I need to encourage you all to rate this session, which you can do on the conference app, and I also want to tell you that the next session is noted economist and author Norina Hertz, and she's going to be talking about the next generation of savers immediately after this session. So all that remains is just to say thanks to our panelists. Thank you.